I've been in xAPI since it was conceived at the ADL initiative. I used to work for the ADL initiative. Left there about 5 years ago and started a company, and we built a learning records store called Veracity Learning. Also was on the video community of practice many years
Okay.
ago and helped work on the video profile and created a JavaScript library called Video or xAPI JS using Video JS, and that's an open source HTML5 player. It's supposed to be going over some of the profile work I've been doing here, and that's kind of my background. But we started talking about videos. Okay, so I was reading your dialogue here in the cohort Slack channel, and I don't want to rehash anything that you guys already know. So what would you like me to dive into? It looks like I saw Matthew is able to figure out how to query the API and get the profile, the JSON LD. I think I sent you guys a template, kind of. Let me pull that. I have that pulled up actually here. Um, you know, kind of a general human readable template for profiles. So
Yeah.
I also have this performance support one that we did for the Navy.
Yep.
I don't want to go over all the fundamentals. If you guys already know that, where would you like me to kind of start at?
I don't, Brian. I don't know whether you were quite in the meeting on Monday when there was a bit of a animated discussion about vocabulary and the reuse of verbs and definition of verbs. But as we're developing the profile for the geolocation, what we've got the team doing is coming up with a list of verbs that we could use within the profile, and the discussion led into the reusing of verbs and the meaning behind verbs, which then got into the discussion of the meaning behind the vocabulary of the words from a readable perspective, and the discussion moved into something like exited as a verb. Now, is that exited a piece of software, or is that exited a building, or is it exited something else? So the discussion was around about reusability of verbs, but creating new verbs around that. And I know the spec says that you can look at something, and if it's close enough and it's in context of what it can actually represent, then you should really use that. However, if it doesn't, you should be going ahead and creating new verbs on that. So what's your view on that?
Yeah, that is an excellent question, and I have a lot of opinions about it. So let me pull up this vocabulary server. So this is something I created when I was at ADL many years ago, and still functional today. It's intended to be retired, and this profile server will take over. One of the problems they have in this vocabulary server, besides it crashing all the time, and it didn't crash when I was there, by the way, but I don't know if it crashes all the time now.
Is
It
that
misses you.
But it crashes a lot, and Torrance Learning came up with a really good fallback resource. This is useful for seeing like all the verbs that are there, but if you look through this list very carefully, you'll see there's a lot of duplicates in there.
Yes. Yeah.
That is one of the problems that is related to vocabulary, and not having a curation process really around populating this vocabulary server. And in the early days, the xAPI community was so eager just to get some verbs out there and vocabulary for people to use so they could start creating stuff. They flushed it with or loaded it with activity streams, IRIs. They had the tin can registry, which preceded all of this work that we did at ADL, actually, because in all honesty, we were kind of dragging our butts at ADL, and the Rusticy Software Group said, well, we'll stand up a registry, and that's why there's all these tin can ones. And then you'll also see some out there from JISC and all over the place. And that's why ADL finally said, all right, we need to get a handle on this. All of these vocabulary and IRIs for xAPI are becoming way too decentralized, and they're all over the place. And it's causing a lot of issues in terms of trying to put together consistent ways of doing analytics on any kind of activity, and then also doing any kind of reports and dashboards and anything like that, because anytime there's a million different ways you could like represent a way to do something. And if we all kind of do it the same way, we're going to be a lot better off in the long run, both from the authoring tool standpoint, but also from that, LRS standpoint and doing analytics. So, what should you do when there is a verb that already exists, but it may not have the meaning that you're trying to prescribe? In that case, actually, I think we had some guidance on this vocab server page, kind of like, and oh, by the way, these quick links on here, in the guidance on here to go and use the repository on GitHub, it's dated. That needs to be taken off. That's the whole point of this profile server, is to get rid of the error-prone practice of expecting people to create profiles and edit JSON LD documents. It's just not a good idea because there's a lot of errors. I made a lot of errors myself, fat fingering it all in. But on the help section on there is something that's very useful, and what it's talking about, author and reuse. You should try to reuse stuff that's already out there that has the meaning you want. Let's take the exited one, for example. If we go back to the exited verb. I don't know that there is another exited verb.
No, but you do have, I think you've got completed on there. It's on there twice.
Yeah. So my rule of thumb is, one, don't use the activity streams verbs, because that version of activity streams was so very old, and activity streams was the specification that influenced the work we did on xAPI. That is what we got the idea from xAPI.
Yeah, they don't resolve either.
Yeah, and well, the new activity stream spec 2.0 does. They moved to linked data, and they moved to that. So everything we were referencing from that old version of activity streams, you can't get any machine readable semantic meaning behind it. It doesn't resolve, and there's no way to find out a schema associated with it, or to find out what the actual definition of the words are. So I would stay away from the activity stream stuff, is a good rule of thumb. If there's something in here, let's take the ADL exited. This is kind of, some of them that are written kind of generically actually work well sometimes. This one indicates the actor intentionally departed from the activity or object. That is so generic, you could really apply it to just about anything. Yes. So that's why that one may work fine. This one from Tin Can just below it is specifically talking about exiting a frame from a camera. So that's a little bit more contextual around using a camera, and that makes sense. But generally exiting something like this should be able to be reused by everybody, in all honesty. Some of them were unintentionally duplicated because, like I mentioned earlier, everything was decentralized. So you may have had one community of practice creating a verb, and at the same time another group was creating that same verb, and they just didn't know it because we didn't have a centralized system like this in place for people to go look up and reuse stuff. So that's why you'll see a lot of duplication in there.
So are we looking at where the profile server is coming in? Is that going to be, correct me if I'm wrong, but a profile contains verbs, but they are separate in the sense that a verb register, you can have just an individual verb, you don't necessarily within a statement. So, well, you do have an individual verb, but what I'm saying is there going to be a central repository for all verbs moving forward? Is that a plan?
That is, kind of what the profile server was supposed to help embrace. You can host your own verbs on your own server. There's not a lot less chance for reusability if that is a goal. If you don't care and your project is just going to be some internal project that no one else is ever going to use, then you're fine at coining your own IRIs. But in terms of you're having some success in another LRS, being able to automatically render some dashboards or do something with your data, you're going to have really low chances of that if you're coining your own verbs. The whole The whole point of the reusability, besides making it easier for everybody, is also, and like I mentioned earlier, in the reporting and the dashboards and analytics, some of that stuff will be automatically provided if you're using stuff that's already well used in the community. Yeah, and you hinted at something else there too, Julian. So the old ADL vocabulary server was just the the verbs, activity types, extensions. These are all the concepts. It didn't have all the other things in profiles because that spec was still being worked on. And a profile provides more specific things around statement templates and patterns, which are rules for the sequence in which a statement may be required. So we got like the video profile here. I'll pull this one up for an example. Lots of concepts on here. A lot of them pause, play, completed, seeked. And some of these may have already been defined, but they were not the exact meaning they were looking for in the video profile. So that's why you'll see some of those recreated. The statement templates in here. This is what's different than the ADL vocabulary server. Is it defines exactly what are the kind of requirements for how a statement should be constructed for that particular type of activity or interaction or whatever. Actually, there's not a lot of examples in some of these older ones.
No.
Some of the newer ones I had just started to put up here to the Navy, from the Navy group. I have some examples in there. Let's see the performance support one. So we have statement templates, and within each template, I started to put in statement example. This is the deprecated one, sorry, initialized. So you can actually get an example of what that statement should look like, and I think eventually it would be nice if all of the statement templates had an example to go with it as well. And I know you guys, you started off with your, what's that?
I was just going to ask, is there any kind of dashboard that shows which, a long list of all the profiles, but which ones have those examples? One of the challenges is I wind up navigating through the concepts.
I'm pretty sure the only ones are the newer ones that I put in there from the Navy.
Okay.
I didn't see any of the older ones because in all honesty, I created the JSON LD that populated the profiles a long time ago, and those are what they used to initially populate the profile server here, and I didn't have, there was no place to put it an example in the JSON LD document that would carry over here. So that's kind of a new feature they added when they stood up the profile server.
Okay.
But kind of back to your train of thought there, Julian, and your approach, getting your verb list together, I think is a good idea. That's always a good first step, like in all the other communities of practice I've worked in. And then from there, you kind of derive like, what are the things we want to track? More so than just the verbs. What is the discrete activity we want to track? Whether it's someone clicking a specific type of interaction, answering a question on a quiz, or whatever, that really helps you get at the statement template, the thing that you want to track, and then the statement template helps you figure out which verbs you need.
Okay.
So those are both good. I mean, if you look at this template or this performance support, this human-readable document we came up with, and I could talk to that in a little bit, but I found out that, for developers, these human-readable profile documents are more valuable than anything. I mean, the profile server is great for, providing an API for machine-readable purposes, such as what Torrance Learning did. They are querying the profile server, getting the profile data, and presenting you with all the profile metadata on another site. Conceptually, you can do the same thing with a content authoring tool. You've seen tools like Torch or Vantis, some of these other ones that have a drop down and let you pick verbs when you're authoring some content. So the reason why, another big driver for making this profile server and using linked data is because it allowed us to publish the metadata about xAPI profiles, so that authoring tools and other tool vendors could actually reuse that data, and helping people create xAPI content.
Does the link data come through in the API?
Yeah, it's in the. I believe it's in the JSON LD document. It should be returned in there.
Okay.
But yeah, we found that if so you're a group wanting to create profiles, I would argue that just from my experience, it's easier to come up with a human readable document because this is more valuable to developers.
Yeah.
And then here, you're defining, okay, what are our verbs, what are our activity types, what are our extensions, but more importantly, let me turn this.
Hey, so this is what you would link out to, you would link out to this from the profile server, really, wouldn't you? This human readable document.
Yeah, and this is in the so if I look at the profile details right here, there's a element in the profile.
Yeah.
I think it's not see also or something like that. I can't remember what metadata element, but there's a metadata element in the JSON LDME that lets you provide an external link that gives you more information about the profile. And essentially that's what this is right here. However, the good thing about the profile server, like I was saying earlier, it's really a pain in the butt to hand jam JSON LD and not have a bunch of errors. So the point of the profile server, besides giving you more functionality around creating statement templates and patterns and finding concepts you can reuse, is to provide a easier way to generate the JSON LD. And for example, this documentation field, let me go here and edit it. It's listed as more information, but if you were to look at this as a JSON LD representation, it wouldn't look like a form like this. It'd be in a property value field, and I can't remember what the more information one is. Like I said, it's something else. But the whole point of this profile server is it's giving you like a human readable user interface to enter this stuff in instead of working in a JSON LD document.
Yeah. I've just opened the LD. I'd not looked at one before. I've just opened one for the video profile. Now I understand.
You see where it's at? What's the name
I
of that
see.
field?
It's the pennies just dropped because I can read the JSON. It makes sense to me. Maybe not to a lot of other people, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Possibly a little bit sad, but that makes sense.
It's like somewhere at the top of the document. It might even be called more information.
It's C also. It's called
C
C
also.
Yeah.
Okay. Which I think that comes from an RDF vocabulary somewhere.
Okay.
But anyway, so I mean, that is the whole point of the profile server. Like, you shouldn't have to know RDF and shouldn't have to know all these other vocabularies and type them in and write up a JSON LD. Like, that's what they wanted to do. This profile server is make it easier so people could create a profile, enter in the fields, into a web-based form, and it will generate the link data behind the scenes.
So the idea there is that the likes of Lectora and the like can pull the LD file, the JSON LD file, and then am I correct in saying that this is the way, from a very high level, is to work? Is the profile server? You build the profile, it gets published. The likes of Lectora can connect to the server, pull a list of all the profiles, and then drill down into the different verbs within the profiles that you're looking for.
Yep, that's the idea, and like how they handle that from a user interface perspective inside their tool. Yeah, that's their problem. And I mean, the bigger problem is like evangelizing this so that the authoring tool providers get on board with it and make it easier for people creating xAPI content. Last time I checked, most of the authoring tool vendors still just support 0.9 of 10 can, and they haven't done any very nice improvements to support xAPI. Most people use authoring tools. If they want to add more advanced tracking with xAPI, they have to write some custom JavaScript to do it.
Yeah. Okay.
But so this template was helpful. Like, when we went and did this for the Navy, you know, is undergoing a big transformation of their learning initiatives and trying to do less, you know, self-paced courseware and more performance support, more simulations and things like that. They're ready to jump into xAPI, so we got involved with helping them, you know, adopt xAPI, reuse what they could out there, but getting these documents together for their developers, but also for acquisition.
Yeah.
People writing contracts to say, "Hey, go develop some content for us." They needed to hand over these documents to say, "These are the requirements to build your content. Now go build it." Not say, "Hey, go do xAPI." You know, they did that a couple years ago on a project I was involved in. The contract went something like, "Hey, do xAPI. You just got to at least do open and close statements. Everything else is up to you." Well, when you do that, you don't get a lot of consistency in
Wow.
your,
Yeah, that's good.
you know, like I was talking about earlier, your reports and your analytics. You're going to run into a lot of misinterpretations of things. So they wanted some solid documentation they could hand out to the developers and implement the stuff in a consistent way.
Now, does
It's
it?
really it's really interesting. You've just you just mentioned the word simulation, and I'm part of a startup called Symbiotics Innovations, which is a veteran startup here in Australia. And the two guys that I'm working with are ex-Army and ex-Army aviation, and are heavily involved in the simulation aspect um, of the helicopters that they have here. And so, yeah, I've just brought up the simulation-based profile that could potentially be used there. So I'll be having a little chat with them later, because I've always said, you know, these guys aren't technical; they're more trainers, and they understand the not the technical, but the fundamental and the principles of the simulation and how it works. I said, well, how do we get data from that? I said, but you can get data for anything. It's just a matter of setting it up and plugging it in and making sure that you send the right things. Well, this is just
Yeah.
I've got my mind sinking into
Hey,
overload.
You in there
hey,
is
that
draft.
simulation-based profile is very basic, and it provides. It's kind of like a.
But that's
Well,
all
it's
you
kind of
need.
like this. It's kind of like this common reference profile approach where, and this is like actually the Navy's idea. They're like, you know, we've got all these kind of like generic activities like opening a page or clicking a link or printing a file. That, you know, that can be reused across all kinds of profiles. So we need some common profile that the other ones can reference. And then we want to do the same thing with simulations, because we have all these other types of simulations out there. And so there's another one I've got in draft here. I haven't finished publishing it because it's very big, but it's a builds on top of the simulation profile. It's a task trainer profile, which actually I'll click the link here. Actually, I've got some different templates here. It's all like scenario based, but
Oh
there's
yeah.
a lot of stuff in here for like corrective feedback, um, view, pass, completed, failed, kind of the typical stuff, but some stuff that's very specific to the U.S. Navy, and
Mm.
their codes. They have a data module code called S1000D, which deals with technical publications. That's like documentation for how to like use equipment on a ship. That's all using a standard called S1000D. It's all XML based. There's a lot of other tie-in to things that are kind of Navy specific, but there's probably a lot of this that things that aren't extensions that would be maybe applicable to what you're doing. I could
Mm.
send you a link to the, or I'll send you a copy of the Word document. Actually, it's up here on this other resource. And I think Brian sent a link to this in our cohort, but this xAPI Pro library resource we did for the Navy. Again, this was trying to help the contracting people and trying to help the developer people. And there's if you click on the simulations, there's the simulation task trainer simulation profile. If you wanted to check that out in the meantime until I get a chance to publish it on the profile server, you can read it.
Are those available as Word documents?
I have them as Word documents somewhere. I don't know that I can share those out because they were, a deliverable to them. I'd have to get their permission. But that I did try to at least, that that Word document I sent you guys, Brian, with this kind of human readable. I kind of stripped everything out and just left like the structure in there.
Right. Okay.
Hopefully that gives you a little bit of a starting point if you wanted to go with the human readable version first before the putting it in the profile server.
I think it makes sense.
It made it a lot easier.
Sense. Yeah.
I mean, I could go through, and actually this is what I've been doing here with this task trainer simulation one. First, I go in and I add all the verbs and add all the activity types as concepts, and then I go to each statement template, initializing a simulation. I mean, I basically copy and paste the name and the description of that thing, and then right here it tells you bullet for bullet like what you need to set each thing to. Well, that's how you define your rules. So if I'm in the profile server, let's do the initializing a simulation as an example. I got an example statement. I copied and pasted that from the human readable document. Added the verbs. So this is initializing a simulation. The determining property needs to be a verb. Determining activity type needs to be simulation. Needs to be initialized for the verb and simulation for the activity type. So that was easy to add. And then all those things I had in bullets in the Word document translate into statement rules. And you can pretty much click add rule. And it, I don't know if you guys have tried to do this yet in the profile server, but based on what you're trying to add, let's say you wanted to add a context extension, or you wanted to add a verb, you add the verb, and then you just have to write like the location or the IRI of the verb in here is where that would go, and then you hit save and it would add it. So it makes like adding this stuff as in a profile a lot easier, but using this profile server user interface, but it makes it 10 times more easier if you've already kind of documented it in another document, because you can copy and paste it in there.
Right.
And yeah, that's it. I just go through each of these different kind of statement template examples and put in the requirements and put in an example. It's still all very time consuming. So
yeah,
you have to ask yourself, is it, if it's a really big profile, it can take a while to get everything documented. You gotta have some internal reviews with your team to make sure you're capturing the things you intend to capture. Generate some sample statements, dashboards based on that data, and make sure it's kind of getting at what you're trying to capture. It definitely takes time to do this stuff, and that's probably why there has been slow. It's been very slow to get any of the stuff in there. That's why you see my name on a lot of it, because I'm the only one that's done a lot of it.
Yeah. Guys, I'm going to have to jump off. I've got another meeting that I need to set up for.
All good.
But thank you, Jason. You've cleared up a few things for me. So
yeah, sure. Hey, anytime reach out. I'll be glad to help any way I can. Just shoot me a message, and I think you've got my email already.
Yeah.
Through are you getting on the you're not getting on that call with Peter Hawkins, are you?
Which one's that?
Are you getting on that geolocation meeting, or is that some other
No, I'm involved in that, but when's that happening? Unless you guys
know. Oh no, I thought I was just because I'd met you through Peter.
We're working on all that together. Yeah. So the geolocation profile came out of the CFA application that we created, or that I developed, because I as I was developing it, I just started to realize there was no profile, which then led me down this path. So that's where that comes from. So
yeah, I think there can be a big benefit to it if you want your work to be reused, even within your company or organization or outside of it. But if it's just like a one-off project, it might not be worth the the effort.
No, well, that's where some of the frank and robust discussions are coming around verbs at the moment.
Yeah,
is we want it to be generic, but people just have all these ideas that are coming in, and the verb list is just growing. So we've sent out to the whole team and said, right, whack in your verbs that you want, go and find out whether they exist and whether they will match the definition matches what we want, and then we'll start refining from there. So, people bring Pokemon in and child-based location learning and treasure hunts and all those different types of things. So anyway, I've got someone calling me. I do need to jump off. Sorry.
No problem. Hey,
Thank
take
you,
care,
guys.
Julian.
Thanks, Julian.
And I can stay on for a little bit longer, Brian, if you wanted me to go through and address anything.
Yeah. So part of the challenge for me, and I'm realizing some of it, is you're in there looking at it as an author. I'm looking at it as a user. I don't have authoring privileges. And so I think a lot of the fields that you're seeing aren't available to me, or aren't exposed to me as with my user level privileges. And I was
you have to if you want to work on a profile that already exists, you have to go to the working groups, and as you can see, I've requested some. I haven't been approved to join yet. They're a little latent on approving those, but like for CMI5, if you wanted to join that, or this one, just click the join button and they'll give it a request.
Well,
and you have to ping ADL if they don't respond to you, because I had to get a hold of them too on a couple of these.
One of the things, actually, I could show you if you got a minute.
Yeah, sure. Let me stop my screen share here.
Okay. So part of what I did is start to introspect on the data and look at how it's structured. And what I've done is pull in some profile data. So if I just create a new record and duplicate what we saw for that common reference profile, I've got a script that goes through and looks at the first level of detail in that JSON and tells me roughly there's 18 concepts, 0 patterns, 12 templates, and 1 version that's been released. And then part of what I can do is look at it and say, okay, this 18 concepts here is another JSON element or array of arrays, so I can start to digest that. And I just initiated another script that'll go through, and what it's doing at this point is loosely it's looking at each of the 18 concepts, but what it's actually doing is saying, of those 18 that you see, how many of them actually meet the concept definition? And I've added in some intelligence to say, if it's not quite the right type, just go in and process the next one. But what I realized was, when I go through the concept list, I'm not pulling everything that's out there on the profile. And Matt just made a post today that said, well, part of what you're seeing are these related or linked information, where someone who's building the profile says, I'm using these from another profile. Here's the original detail of what my profile consists of. So what I realized is I'm only pulling in the original references here. I'm not getting anything related. And that's why I asked you the question earlier, is it in that JSON? Because I don't, aside from trying to open this field up or put it in a text editor, which I might have open here. I don't know if I have it open on this.
Well, what are you trying to do by
part of it is just
traversing?
Initially I was just trying to digest it and look at the spec and see what lines up, and then I started off by digesting the JSON, and then what I did was start to review the spec, and I said, well, how does this line up against what's out there? And so I pulled in the fields from the spec and the required, and then I added in value fields from what we just digested, so I can see, line by line what it's showing me. And
that's neat.
So part of what I'm doing is just trying to understand what the spec gives me. And let me go back to that first screen. And
wow, that's wild. That's wild. I've never seen that. So it actually takes the spec, and then you pull in an example data set based on using that spec.
Exactly.
And then it populates those. That is kind of cool.
So I'm populating the fields based on the JSON I'm getting. And initially what I thought was I had to go through that process you just showed me, where I request access to the working group, because when I first looked at the API documentation, the way it was written, I thought I needed to have permission to pull that. Again, Matt just made a comment in Slack that no, you can go out there and pull the whole references, but if you want to be able to write to it, you need that permission. So
Right.
what I had done was I got permission from the video profile to actually request. So I have one link that allows me to go out and get the video profile, and then I can start to digest it. And I was thinking I needed to have permission from each working group to try and get in and pull data from all of them. And then Matt just casually mentioned, well, I'm already doing this for the flattener that we built for Torrance Learning. So I think you touched on it earlier, was they've built this sort of backup to the vocabulary server, and the way he's doing it is pulling it from the API, which is what I'm trying to do. So one of my things that was driving me to talk to you about these things was how could I get the related verbs, that aren't coming through from this process, when all I'm seeing from the 23 is more of a limited set. And I'll just go ahead and let this one process. I think this one's like 12 of them actually come in as valid. And then I've got another script. They take a while if you try and process the whole thing. And like the DoD instructional design spec, I think it has like 500 concepts. So it takes it takes quite a few minutes to process it. But part of what I was just trying to do was understand that structure and see where things are. So not quite 500. It has 426. And you can see that once it renders that down, 424 of them come in as valid concepts. I think we're going to link to the related ones. Of them come through, and then I can click that related concepts link and show.
That's great. That's a really neat way to learn it.
I mentioned this before. It's pulling in the concept keys and identifying which ones align with the type values that we looked at on the other screen. So we're able to validate whether or not the concept should be pulled in and related. And some of the other text shows up over here as it's processing. So let me go back to the other screen here, and we'll get back to.
It's a cool tool. I've never seen anything like that. That would have been handy many years ago for me.
That we were looking at. What it did with that script was it processes this table, or this portal that's got related data, and actually must have stopped it. But it's showing me that even though this thinks there are 23 values, it only pulled in, I think, 5 of them that actually qualify as verbs or activities. There's certain types, and that was part of me understanding that specification a little better, is they're sort of reusing. When I show you these other views, profile properties, it'll say which ones match. In this case, the concepts that come in through 7.1 have to match verb, activity type, or attachment type. So even though it's part of the structure for a concept, it doesn't show up on this table, it shows up somewhere else. So part of it was me having to learn that it's not just a simple relational structure where they're using this type and this table. They're bringing it in a common structure and format, but only some of them will show up as 7.1 list, and others will show up in some of these other lists as extensions and document resources. So again, they're using a similar structure, but they have to match these certain type strings for them to show up.
Right. Yep. And there, some profiles may not use those. Document resources.
And then they can be blank. They're optional. I think if they're a resource, it's required to be one of these, but they don't have to have resources. The resources don't.
That's right.
So you can see sort of what I've been working on, but part of it was just my understanding of the API for the profile server sort of limited what I was able to build it. And some of what drove me to want to talk to you about this has sort of been resolved in the last few days.
Oh,
which
that's
is always
great.
fun.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I was glad to see Matthew was able to hit that. I remember him posting a question about that, hitting the API and stuff a week or two ago. I
Yeah.
think I responded to that, so it sounds like you make a lot of progress too. That's great.
So let's see. You had shared that human readable template document.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is one that we can use. I mean, part of what I'm thinking is we sort of want to do some of that work for the projects that we're working on as we define what that profile is that we're going to use and start to extend it. I think this would be a good way to build, like you were saying earlier, the human readable document rather than jumping in and building a profile. I can use this as a structure. So
That's right.
I appreciate.
That's right. And it'll be useful for you when you are ready to go populate the ADL profile
Yeah.
server if that is something that you desire to do.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
said, you may
Well,
not desire to do that because you may not care about others reusing your work, or you may be doing something very specific that you don't want to share outside of your company or something too. I've heard that use
well,
case before.
Judy, who had to log off earlier, she is actually working with the Pebble Pro project and is planning to build a profile for that product. And I think she's rather torn because she was excited to talk to you about guidance on how to build that. But that's part of why I wanted to drag this in so it gets on the recording and I can make sure she sees the file. It's still up there in Slack. It took me a minute to search for it, but she can see this and use this as a starting point. Rather than starting from scratch. I think she'll appreciate the running start that you've given us.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I think
Um,
this would help Judy a lot. I've known Judy for a while, so yeah, tell her to reach out to me as well. If I can help you guys with any of this profile stuff. I think that's a good starting point. Figuring out what are the different types of activities and things you want to track, and then from there you figure out what verbs you need to define, what extensions, and all that other stuff.
right, right.
Rather than starting directly on the profile server. It's relatively new, so I imagine this kind of feedback will probably end up relating to ADL. There's a lot of moving targets. IEEE's getting ready to start a group that is going to define this human readable template, which I'm going to submit and propose. Like we start with something similar to this. So
Oh, good.
it may be a little premature, but it's better than nothing. And I think this is conceptually where we want to go. And
I do think it's where I
we-
want to go. I'm glad to hear you
we
saying
got we
that. I'd
we
like
as
to see
humans got to
this.
understand it before we can expect the machines
Yes.
to try to understand
Yes.
it.
No, I appreciated you sharing these
Yeah.
long ago, and sharing that Word doc because it definitely helped my understanding. Like I said, I was trying to digest the specification and look at the JSON structure, and it was a hard approach. Your human readable documentation was much more approachable.
Yeah, and thanks for the feedback. I remember sharing that with you a while back, maybe last year when we were initially drafting it. And I think you had some feedback and found some typos and things for me,
Yeah, early
if
on.
I'm not mistaken.
I think it.
Very
If
good.
we can sort of wrap things up, I think a couple questions I'd ask you would be, what's your view or understanding on how the profile server is governed? Is that completely managed by ADL now, or is that something you're still developing?
Yeah, we helped support the development of it with making better on an ADL contract. So
Okay.
yeah, that contract is ended.
Okay.
ADL is the governance of it, and I believe it's hosted currently at USA Learning.
Right.
I think their plans are to keep it hosted there. I don't know. You'd have to ask ADL for sure. Long-term governance, I don't know if there's a intention for that to transition to IEEE since the spec is going there. Again, that's another one of those moving targets. But for now, it's not. We're not developing any more on it. As far as I know, it's out there and available for everyone to use.
Any other comments you have for us?
Yeah, no, not at all. Just reach out to me if I can be of any help. I'm glad to volunteer some time on the cohort and help out with the xAPI in general or anything especially related to profiles, and try to stay involved with it because I put so much time into it over the years when I was at ADL and even after now with
Yeah.
some projects we're on. So happy to help support and answer any questions, help you guys out in any way I can. Just let
Okay.
me know.
Thanks, Jason. We appreciate
Yep.
your time.
Hey, thanks,
I
Brian.
know it's been a long day for you, and we do
All
appreciate you
good.
checking in with us. All right.
Yep. Yeah. I'll try to join some other meetings when I can.
Okay. I'll talk to you later.
This is a standing meeting, right?
Yes.
Weekly.
Yes. Weekly
Okay.
meeting.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Take
Yep.
care. Have a nice evening.
We're running through Thanksgiving at this time frame. So,
Okay.
all right.
Good to know. I'll
Thanks.
try to check back in.
Yep.
Thanks a lot, bud. Take care.
So as a wrap up, we talked about this human readable template that Jason had published, and it is available in Slack. If I can activate my Slack instance, I will show you how I found it again. What I did was I went up to the search bar, typed in Jason's name, and it actually shows up as the first entry on September 24th as the Human-readable Template.docx, and you can click download and it will pull it onto your system. And Judy or others, Julian, that are interested in building their profiles, Jason has provided this as a running start for that human readable document. So there's a lot of structure that he's already built in. You can see it's a Word document, and it's set up with a table of contents and quite a bit of structure already. So I think there's good value in starting with this. And you heard it on the video. He is actually going to propose that IEEE adopt this document format as a standard for Profile Human-readable Templates. So I think it would give anybody looking to publish that a running start. Thanks for your time.